Please welcome Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you, Mira. And thank all of you who are here today. I am so glad to be at CAP's Ideas Conference. You know, I've been here many times before to talk with a lot of people in this room about ideas. Progressive ideas, big ideas, small ideas. And my aim is always in the same direction. How to make this country, how to make this government work for people. I believe that this is the central question facing America today. Set aside the debates about big government versus small government, about more government versus less government. The important thing we need is accountable government. Government not just for the rich and powerful, but a government that works for and answers to all of us. Accountable government is the basis of American democracy. But for years, let's just face it, it has been slipping away. For years, government has worked better and better for those at the top and pushed the concerns of everyone else further and further behind. There are a lot of reasons for this, but two of them are actually pretty obvious to most Americans: concentrated money and concentrated power. And it's time to speak plainly about these problems and start thinking about how to fix them. Because concentrated money and concentrated power are corrupting our democracy and becoming dangerously worse with Donald Trump in the White House. First, consider the impact of concentrated money. Over the past few decades, money has fundamentally reoriented our democracy. Money slithers through Washington like a snake. And I'm not simply talking about giant bags of money and cash exchanging hands in dark alleys. I'm talking about the dozens of perfectly legal ways that the super rich and giant corporations use their cash and their influence to rig the system and to get government to favor their interests over the interests of everyone else. You know, take a clear-eyed look at how Washington works and who it works for. Politicians swim in oceans of corporate campaign contributions. Billionaires build super PACs to secretly finance candidates and tilt elections. The revolving door spins freely between jobs in government and jobs with powerful corporations, blurring the line between serving the public and serving corporate masters. Bought and paid for experts testify before Congress and appear constantly on the news. Agency after agency, industry runs the show, and the fox guards the chicken coop. Armies of lobbyists swarm Washington, like a plague of locusts, demanding favors for their employers. Now, President Trump did not invent these problems, but boy, has he made them worse. We all remember Donald Trump's campaign promise that he would drain the swamp in Washington, right? 117 days in, and the swamp is bigger, deeper, uglier, and filled with more corrupt creatures than ever before in history. Days after the election, then President-elect Trump put together a transition team of lobbyists, Wall Street bankers, and big-time industry players. Team Trump has ousted scientists from the EPA and is looking to replace them with hacks from industry that pollute the environment. The Department of Education is bringing in people with ties to for-profit colleges that rip off students and leave them with tens of thousands of dollars of debt. Consider the case of just one advisor who whispers directly in Trump's ear, billionaire hedge fund manager Carl Icahn. In late 2016, Icahn made a massive bet that the price of renewable fuel credits would drop. Then, as Trump's advisor, he pushed policies and recommended political appointments that did, in fact, cause the price of those credits to drop, generating a $50 million profit for himself and the company he owns. You know, wow. I have called for an investigation into Icahn because it doesn't matter if you're a nobody or you're friends with the president. Insider trading is illegal, and White House advisors should not profit off their White House work, period. But let's be clear, Icahn is just the tip of a massive iceberg. The cabinet and the White House are filled with wealthy individuals who are neck deep in personal financial conflicts. President Trump himself set the example by refusing to divest from his family business. People who work for him have followed his lead, showing a brazen disregard for long-standing ethics procedures. So what can we do about all of this? The answer is actually there is a lot that we could do about this. We could pass legislation to require the presidents to disclose their tax returns so that the American people can see any secret dealing. We can pass my Presidential Conflicts of Interest Act, which would require presidents and vice presidents to put their assets in a blind trust during their years of public service. We could beef up independent inspectors general who look over the shoulders of political leaders at the agencies. We could upgrade the Office of Government Ethics, which polices financial conflicts in the executive branch. And we could demand that Republicans who control Congress start using their oversight authority to hold this administration accountable for self-dealing. There is a lot we could do. We have to remember, when people shrug at the president's conflicts, it's not because they don't care. It's not because they think it's okay. It's because they know that money is already causing a deep rot in Washington. And that is why it is time for systemic change. We can start that change with the way that political campaigns are financed. And we can build on the foundation of many American cities and states that have established publicly funded elections. Get the money out. Yeah, but we need to do more. That's not enough by itself. Regulatory process must be reformed so that giant companies cannot bury public servants in an avalanche of nonsense and stand in the way of progress every time the government tries to act in the public interest. It is time to slow down the revolving door between corporations and the companies that pay employees barely described bribes to take public jobs. And we need to fight for a Supreme Court that will reverse its terrible Citizens United mistake. And let me add to that one. And while we're working on the Supreme Court, we must also build the movement across this country to pass a constitutional amendment that will allow us to shut off the spigot of cash that is drowning our government. We need that kind of change. Look, I get it. There's more we could do, but I'll tell you what, that's a good start in taking down the government for sale sign that hangs over Washington, D.C. Reducing the influence of concentrated money will not be enough to fix our political system. If we want accountable government, we also need to reduce the influence of concentrated power. Now, before I was a senator, I was a law professor. I taught contracts, I taught business transactions, I taught bankruptcy. So it shouldn't surprise anyone here that I believe that strong, healthy markets are the key to a strong, healthy America. But today, markets are struggling. In every corner of our economy, competition is increasingly choked off. Airlines, banking, healthcare, pharma, agriculture, telecom, tech, in industry after industry, A handful of giant corporations control more and more and compete less and less. Massive consolidation means less competition, which means prices go up, quality goes down, and many people's jobs are eliminated. Massive consolidation means that the big guys can lock out smaller, newer competitors. It means the big guys can crush innovation. It means the big guys can grow fat and lazy, jacking up prices and feasting off yesterday's glory. And studies show that consolidation even contributes to flat wages and income inequality. Concentrated market power also creates concentrated political power, the kind of power that captures our government. And that's exactly what's happening as President Trump bows to the power and influence of these industrial giants and financial titans. The CEO of ExxonMobil is now the Secretary of State. Goldman Sachs now has enough people in the White House to open a branch office. The Senate is scheduled just this week to vote on a nominee for Associate Attorney General who worked for years at the Chamber of Commerce doing what? Shielding companies from any government accountability. You know, do you get the feeling that if Bernie Madoff weren't in prison, that he'd be in charge of the SEC right now? You know, look at all that and then add to it a Congress that devotes its time and its energy to figuring out how to cut taxes yet again for giant corporations, because apparently paying zero is not enough for some of these giant corporations. You know, even health care bills get perverted into corporate welfare systems, taking health care away from 24 million people in this country to fund tax breaks for a handful of millionaires, billionaires, and giant corporations. But here's the good news on this one, and there is good news. America has tackled this problem before. More than a century ago, Congress passed antitrust laws to break up the concentration of corporate wealth and power. Teddy Roosevelt earned the title of trust buster as he fought back against powerful monopolies that wielded huge influence over our government. And here's the good news: the reformers won. Donald Trump used to talk about the dangers of monopoly, but that talk has pretty much disappeared now that he is president of the United States. It is time for us to do what Teddy Roosevelt did: pick up the antitrust stick again. And sure, the stick has collected some dust, but the laws are still on the books. We can crack down on anti-competitive mergers and existing monopolies. We can push back against giant banks that are crowding out smaller competition. We can pick up tools at the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, and other agencies to promote healthy and innovative markets throughout this country. We can break up the big banks, and if the president and his team refuse to act, then state attorneys general can step up and use these tools. We can do that. We can do all of that. We just need real leadership and officials with the courage to act. We can make change. So, concentrated money and concentrated power. They influence nearly every decision made in this town. But capture is not complete, at least not yet. And it's not yet complete because for more than 2 centuries, we have slowly and painstakingly built strong institutions in America, institutions intended to ensure that our government will work for everyone. 2 houses of Congress, 3 branches of government, multiple regulatory agencies that are designed to work in the public interest, an independent judiciary, a free press, institutions that help preserve accountable government. Now, don't get me wrong. Like everything else, these institutions have been creaking under the pressures created by a political system drowning in money and strangled by concentrated economic power. Creaking, crumbling, but still standing. Today, President Trump is waging a direct assault on those institutions. First, he turned over the levers of government to the rich and powerful. And then, last week, he made it perfectly clear that he believes that he should be above the law. After he fired FBI Director James Comey, Trump went on national television and told the world that he fired Comey in part because Comey was leading an investigation into ties between the Trump campaign, the Trump administration, and Russia. Trump said top of mind when he fired Comey was, quote, "This Russia thing with Trump." It doesn't get much more brazen than that. It is a basic presumption of our democracy that politicians cannot interfere with law enforcement investigations into their own potential wrongdoing. But President Trump openly admitted to trying to interfere with an ongoing investigation, and he clearly believes there should be no consequences for himself. Trump has tried to set himself above the law before. As a candidate, he attacked a judge overseeing a lawsuit against his fraudulent for-profit college. As president, he attacked the judges who stopped his unconstitutional Muslim ban. When acting Attorney General Sally Yates gathered information about former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's ties to Russia, Trump fired her. When Preet Bharara, the top federal prosecutor in Manhattan, was reportedly looking into shady stock trades made by one of Trump's cabinet officials, Trump fired Bharara. Each move hacks away at the very foundations of accountability. Now is the time to remind Donald Trump that our government is not a plaything to make him richer or a servant to do his bidding. Now is the time to remind him our intelligence secrets are not gossip, and that his personal desire to impress his Russian buddies does not outweigh the safety, security, and lives of Americans and our allies. Now is the time to remind him that in this country, no one is above the law, including the President of the United States. It is time to resist. It is time to fight back, and it is time to be clear about what we believe in. We believe that no foreign power, and especially not Russia, gets to launch an assault on our democracy without any investigation or any consequences, and we're ready to fight for it. We believe in equal justice under law, and we're ready to fight for it. We believe in an economy that doesn't just work for the super rich, but an economy that works for everyone, consumers, small businesses, and workers, and we are ready to fight for it. We believe in accountable government, a government that works not just for those at the top, but for every single one of us, and we are willing to fight for it. I have news for Donald Trump. No matter how much he might admire Vladimir Putin's Russia, here in America, we will never accept autocracy. Here in America, we will embrace and defend democracy. And we do that by demanding that everyone in our government is accountable, even the President of the United States. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You bet. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Thank you.
All right, so I know that you have to get to an important caucus lunch where I'm sure nothing will be discussed of importance. So we want to take, but we do want to take a few questions. So I'm having a hard time seeing whether people have, oh, there's one question right there. There's a mic right behind you.
My name is Seema Chaturvedi.
Hello, Seymour.
Thank you so much for your leadership. And it's a question that I've been grappling with, and your passion is so palpable. When do we call a spade and call explicitly obstruction of justice?
So I think that we start by putting in place the tools for an investigation. I have called for a special prosecutor. Many of my colleagues have called for a special prosecutor. There are people around the country. And why? Because we want someone who's going to investigate the ties between Russia, the Trump campaign, and Donald Trump himself, who cannot be fired by Donald Trump. That seems like a good start. Someone who is independent, who will run a transparent investigation, who has the right authority to run it, and who also has the resources to run it. I think this is a first start for where we need to be, and we need to push our colleagues hard on this, and begin with an investigation. It doesn't mean it is the end point. It means we start by making sure that we have documented the facts, and I want to be clear on this point, in a nonpartisan way. This is not a point of Democrats versus Republicans. Every American should care about the integrity of our democratic process. Democrat, Republican, independent, libertarian, vegetarian. Everyone should care. And that's how I think we have to do this. We have to get someone independent to do the investigation, and then we see where it takes us. If there's nothing there, so be it. If there is criminal activity there, then we're ready for the next step. But I think that's the best way for us to do it and keep this country all moving in the same direction, because that's what it's going to take. I don't want this to be a partisan issue.
Questions? Any more questions? Right over there. Mike is coming.
I'm Smita Siddhanti. Thanks for your leadership and awesome thoughts. But I wanted to know, this campaign finance reform has been a major issue for a while, and we've tried very hard to fight it. And you did give different alternatives today. Is it anything different that we've been thinking and making efforts on that we actually can make happen?
So I want to make 2 points on campaign finance reform. The first one is that we just got to get a lot of people around this country energized behind this one. Americans get it. Americans are appalled by what we're doing in Washington. If we can get the democratic process up and running, if we get the grassroots really engaged, this is an issue on which people all across the political spectrum say there is a terrible problem in Washington and it needs to be fixed. So this is one of those that I think is much less about my trying to knock on doors around the United States Senate, and much more about being out talking to people all across this country and building the kinds of connections that I know CAP supports and others are supporting to try to put wind in our sails as we go forward. That's number one. But I want to make a second point, and that is campaign finance reform is not enough. The power of money in Washington is something we've just got to face head on. And it's not just in the campaigns. Look what happens on the lobbying side. Look what happens in every regulatory agency in this town. There's always someone there to make, in every decision that has to be made, in every informational session, in every single time they open the doors to these agencies, there's someone there who is paid to be there to take the point of view of the giant industry and say, oh, you got to watch out for them. You got to make sure when you're writing this, couldn't we get another little word in here or just a little piece or a thing over there? And that's what happens. You end up with a special this and an extra that and a piece of this. And you do that 1 year, and then you do it the next year, and then the next year, and then the next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. And it tilts the system enormously. We have a problem of bought and paid for experts in this town. People who show up in front of Congress, and more to the point, who show up in their equivalent of their lab coats every night on the news, every morning on the news. And what are they doing? They're spouting the position they've been paid to take. Washington, the whole place is influenced by money. And one of the things that we have to talk about and have a serious conversation about is not just campaign finance reform. It's how we build a democracy so we're getting ground up. People from the grassroots, how their voices are being heard in Washington. And I think that's going to be a hard task, but I'll say one more time. I think there are a lot of people in the grassroots who want to make that happen. And if we seize this moment, we could fundamentally return democracy to the people. That's why I'm a happy warrior. You bet. You bet.
Thank you.
We have one more? Nope.